What if the truth was right there, but no one saw it? Today, we're diving into 5 unsolved mysteries that challenge everything we know about true crime. These stories aren't just brutal, they're baffling. From the Sodder children disappearance, where 5 kids vanished from a burning house without leaving a trace of ash or bone, to the brutal Keddie cabin murders, a massacre so loud, 3 children somehow slept through it in the next room. If you are obsessed with cold cases and the ultimate unexplained true stories, you're in the right place. Subscribe to the channel right now so you don't miss our deep dives. And let's start the countdown of the 5 most disturbing and unheard crimes. If you're looking for a quaint, small-town horror story, keep looking. This ain't it. The place is Keddie, California, 1981. And town is a generous word. Keddie was a corpse, and it was just waiting for the funeral. A dying logging resort in the Sierra Nevada mountains. A place full of rough men, transient families, and secrets. It was a place to get lost. A place to hide. Our victim is Glenna Sue Sharp. She was 36, a single mom, and she was hiding. She'd just run out on an abusive husband and was holed up in Cabin 28 of the Keddie Resort with her 5 kids. Cabin 28. Remember that name. The night is April 11th, 1981. It's a Saturday. The cabin is full. You've got Sue. You've got her 15-year-old son, John. He has a friend over, 17-year-old Dana Wingate. In the back bedroom, you've got the 2 younger boys, 10-year-old Rick and 5-year-old Greg, plus their friend, 12-year-old Justin. Sue's 12-year-old daughter, Tina, is also home. The oldest daughter, Sheila, is at a sleepover next door. The cabin is flimsy. The walls are paper thin. It's a box filled with people. The next morning, April 12th, Sheila comes home around 7:45 a.m. The front door is unlocked. She steps inside and into a slaughterhouse. The living room is a scene of pure, primitive rage. Sue Sharp is on the floor, her hands and feet bound with electrical tape and appliance wire. She is naked from the waist down. She's been beaten with the butt of a pellet rifle, and she's been stabbed so many times in the chest that the steak knife is still in her, bent at a 30-degree angle from the force. Next to her is her son, John. He's also bound. His throat is cut. On the floor nearby is John's friend, Dana Wingate. He's been bound and manually, brutally strangled. He was also beaten with a hammer. The carpet is soaked. The blood is on the walls, on the furniture. It is a scene of absolute, unrestrained, personal fury. But this is where the facts of the case stop making any sense at all. This is where the horror gets weird. Fact 1. In the back bedroom, the 2 younger boys, Rick and Greg, and their friend Justin, are alive. They are unharmed. They are asleep. Let me repeat that. 3 people, including a 17-year-old boy, are beaten, stabbed, and strangled to death in a tiny, paper-thin cabin. A struggle so violent it bent a knife. And 3 kids in the next room slept through it. How? How is that possible? Fact 2. 12-year-old Tina Sharp is gone. She's not in the cabin. She's not in the woods. She has vanished. The investigation is a joke from minute 1. The Plumas County Sheriff's Department storms the scene. And by storms, I mean they trample it. This isn't forensics, it's a square dance. They let people wander in and out. They pick up evidence, including one of the bloody knives, with their bare hands, wiping off any prints. They collect fingerprints, but most are never identified. They somehow miss a bloody handprint on the wooden doorframe. The investigation is, in a word, botched, whether by incompetence or something else. So, who did it? Let's look at the neighbors. In Cabin 26, right next door, lived Martin Smart and his wife Marilyn. Justin, The 12-year-old boy who slept through the murders was their son. Martin Smart is the one who finds his son. He tells police he'd had a vague dream about the murders. He tells them he saw a car. His stories change. His wife, Marilyn, tells the cops something else. She says that on the night of the murders, Sue Sharp had come over, visibly upset. She said Sue had just been visited by two men. One of them, Marilyn said, was Martin Smart, her own husband. The other was a friend of his, a guy named John Bo Boobied. Bo Boobiday. A name that sounds like a ghost. A supposed ex-con from Chicago. A guy with alleged mob ties. A guy who just happened to be staying with Martin Smart that night. And what a coincidence. Right after the murders, both Smart and Boobied are gone. They leave Keddie. The cops have two prime suspects, named by a witness, who immediately flee the scene. They should be suspect number one. Right? Wrong. The police, for some reason, ignore this lead. They barely question Smart. They don't look for Boobied. Instead, they focus on Sue's ex-husband, who has an ironclad alibi in another state. They focus on drug angles that go nowhere. The case goes cold, fast. The surviving kids are traumatized. And Justin, the boy who slept through it, he finally starts to talk. He tells a therapist that he didn't sleep through it. He says he saw it. He describes a fight. He says he saw his dad, Martin Smart, and his friend, Bo Boobied, in the cabin. He says he saw them attacking Sue. He says he saw John and Dana try to intervene. And he says he saw Tina. He said Tina Sharp was carried out of the cabin, alive, by one of the men. It's a bombshell. But it's the testimony of a traumatized child, and it's changed over time. The police discount it. Years go by. The cabin sits empty, a dark stain on the resort. Then, in 1984, 3 years later, a bottle collector is walking through the woods in Feather Falls, 100 miles from Keddie. He finds a human skull. It's Tina Sharp, the 12-year-old girl who vanished. The investigation now has a fourth homicide, and still nothing. Let's fast forward. 2013. A new sheriff looks at the old files. He finds a letter. It's from Martin Smart, written to his wife Marilyn right after the murders. He writes, "I've paid the price for your love, and now I've bought it with 4 people's lives. It's a confession, right there." In the file, it had been there for 30 years. They find a therapist who treated Smart. The therapist has tapes. On the tapes, Smart admits to the murders. He says he was angry at Sue Sharp for counseling his wife to leave him. He says it was his hammer. He says, "I killed her. But I didn't mean to. The case is blown wide open." But it's too late. Martin Smart died of cancer in 2000. Boobied died in 1988. The investigation wasn't just botched. It feels rotten. It feels like a cover-up. Did the local cops know Smart and Boobied? Were they friends? Did they look the other way on purpose? We know who did it. We just can't prove it. Cabin 28 was finally demolished in 2004. They tore it down, scraped the earth, and tried to erase the stain. But it's still there. This isn't a story about a boogeyman. It's a story about a real-world monster. A story about a small-town secret protected by a badge. It's a story of a brutal, personal, loud massacre that an entire town and its police force decided to sleep through. There is a town in Western Australia that is not a town. You will not find it on any modern map. You will not see road signs welcoming you. The signs that are there, the ones riddled with rust and bullet holes, do not say welcome. They say danger. They say do not enter. They say risk of fatal lung disease. This is Wittenoom, a town not haunted by a ghost, but by a killer that is still there, a killer you can breathe. The story begins in the 1940s. The earth in this remote, ruggedly beautiful gorge was found to be rich with a mineral. It was a beautiful mineral. It shimmered in the rock with long, fine fibers of a deep, mesmerizing blue. Its name was crocetolite. We know it today as blue asbestos, the single most lethal form of asbestos on planet Earth. And so, a town was built, a company town run by Colonial Sugar Refining, or CSR. They built houses, a school, a pub, a hospital. They carved a life out of the red Pilbara dust, and they began to mine the blue silk. The mine and the mill were the heart of Wittenoom, and they were from day one a vision of hell. The air in the mill was a constant, thick, blue fog of asbestos fibers. Men worked in it 8, 10, 12 hours a day. They worked in shorts and singlets, no masks, no protection. They would come home caked in the blue dust, looking like pale blue ghosts. Their wives would shake out their work clothes, breathing in the fibers. The company, CSR, knew. From as early as the 1940s, they knew. They knew the dust was deadly. They knew it caused the sickness. But the mine was profitable. So, they kept quiet. The true horror of Wittenoom is not a single night of violence. It is a murder that takes 40 years to complete. The children of Wittenoom, they played in it. The tailings, the mountains of asbestos waste from the mine, were piled up around the town. They were soft, white, and blue hills. The children would run up them, slide down them, play in the Wittenoom snow. They breathed it in. Every day. The fibers of blue asbestos are microscopic needles. They are too small for the body's defenses to stop. They bypass everything and embed themselves deep in the soft pink tissue of the lungs. And there, they wait. They wait 10 years, 20, 40, and then they trigger the change. First, asbestosis. The lungs scar and harden until breathing is like trying to inflate a leather bag. Or worse, mesothelioma, a rare, aggressive, incurable cancer of the lung lining. It is a death sentence delivered decades after the exposure. It is a slow, agonizing suffocation. By 1966, the mine was no longer profitable. The company, CSR, had taken what it wanted. So, it packed up and it left. And it left behind 3 million tons of asbestos tailings, piled in the gorge, open to the wind. The town of Wittenoom, its purpose gone, began to die. But the sickness was just beginning. By the 1970s and 80s, the former residents of Wittenoom, now scattered across Australia, began to cough. They began to feel a tightness in their chests. They began to die. One by one, the Wittenoom cough became a death rattle. The government finally had to act. They declared the town a contaminated zone. It wasn't just the mine. The fibers were everywhere. In the soil of the schoolyard, in the foundations of the homes, in the dust that coated every single surface. The air itself was poisoned. It was, they declared, the most contaminated site in the Southern Hemisphere. They decided Wittenoom was too contaminated to clean. The only solution was to erase it. They began the phasing out process. They bought the homes and then they bulldozed them. They tore down the school. They tore down the pub. They shut off the power grid. They decommissioned the town. And in 2007, they officially removed its name from all state maps and road signs. Wittenoom, Western Australia, legally ceased to exist. It became a ghost. A toxic, red and blue ghost. This should be the end of the story. A sad, angry post-mortem on a town murdered by corporate greed. But this is where the true horror story begins. Some people refuse to leave. As the town was being torn down, as the warnings grew more dire, a handful of residents dug in their heels. This was their home. They didn't believe the government, or they didn't care, or they were just too stubborn to be told where to live. As of the 2020s, a few were still there, one or two, the last holdouts. Imagine it. Imagine driving for hours into the Australian outback. You pass the giant, screaming red signs. Danger. Asbestos. Letal dust. Do not proceed. You ignore them. You drive on. The paved road turns to dirt. The silence is absolute. And then you see it. Not a town. Just the memory of a town. A grid of empty, cracked streets. Empty foundations like missing teeth. A single rusted flagpole. And silence. The air you are breathing. You can't see it. You can't smell it. But with every breath, you're inhaling microscopic barbed needles of blue poison. And then you see it. A single house, still standing. A satellite dish on the roof. A diesel generator humming in a shed. A water tank. And maybe a person. Sitting on the porch, watching you. What is it like to be the last resident of a town that has been erased? To live in a place where the air itself is a loaded gun? To know that every gust of wind from the gorge is carrying your own slow death? Is it defiance? Is it madness? There are no services, no mail, no power, no water. Just you, the red dust, and the 3 million tons of blue asbestos waiting. The death toll from Wittenoom is estimated to be over 2,000 people, and it is still climbing. Every year, another former resident, another child who played in the snow, gets the diagnosis. This is not a story about a monster that kills you in the night. This is the story of a monster you invited in, a monster that made a company rich, that built a town, and that is now claiming its payment, one lung at a time. The true horror of Wittenoom is the silence, the emptiness, the beautiful, blue, shimmering dust that floats in the air, catching the sun, and the knowledge that the town is not abandoned. The killer never left. I don't know what happened to the Jamison family. You don't know what happened. And the police, even with all the evidence, they definitely don't know what happened. This story, this one isn't a neat little package. It's not a whodunit, it's a what the hell happened. It's a 1,000-piece puzzle where half the pieces are from a different box, and the picture on the cover is just a question mark. It starts in 2009 in Eufaula, Oklahoma. A small town like any other. This is the story of Bobby and Sherilyn Jamison and their 6-year-old daughter, Madison. They weren't a perfect family. Bobby was in a car accident years before and lived with chronic, debilitating pain. Sherilyn suffered from severe depression. They were struggling, but they were a family, and they were looking for a fresh start. On October 8, 2009, they decided to take a drive. They were looking at a 40-acre plot of land for sale, deep in the Sans Bois Mountains. A remote, rugged, beautiful place to get away from it all. They loaded up their white pickup truck, brought their little girl and their beloved family dog, Maisie, and then they vanished. 8 days later, a group of hunters stumbled across the truck. It wasn't crashed. It wasn't hidden. It was just parked on the side of a dirt road, locked. Inside, police found the first pieces of the puzzle. They found the family's wallets, their driver's licenses, their cell phones. They found their coats, and they found Maisie, the dog, malnourished, starving, but alive. And under the driver's seat, they found a bank bag. Inside that bag was $32,000 in cash. Wait, what? Who takes $32,000 in cash to look at a piece of land? Who, in a life or death situation, leaves their dog, their coats, their wallets, and $32,000 behind? The search began. This was a massive manhunt. Hundreds of volunteers, police on horseback, helicopters with thermal imaging. They scoured those mountains, and they found nothing. No footprints, no trail, no sign of a struggle. It was as if the Jamisons had parked their truck, locked the door, and been beamed up by a spaceship. So, theory 1, foul play. Obvious, right? A drug deal gone wrong. That's what the cache says. Maybe they weren't buying land. Maybe they were buying something else. And it went sideways. But the police tore their lives apart. No connection to the drug trade. None. And what kind of drug dealer kills a family and leaves $32,000 behind? It makes no sense. Theory 2, murder-suicide. Maybe Bobby, in constant pain, or Sherilyn, in a deep depression, finally snapped. Maybe one of them killed the others and ran off to die. It's a possibility. A grim one. But then, the investigators look at the cell phones. And they find the last picture. It's a photo of Madison, the 6-year-old, taken by her mom seemingly from the front seat. The girl is in the back. She's not smiling. She's not crying. She's just staring. Some reports say her arms are crossed, that she looks defiant or scared or resentful. It's a haunting, strange, final image. What was happening in that truck? The investigation stalls. The family is just gone. But as police and reporters dig deeper into the Jamisons' life, the story goes from a mystery to a full-blown psychological horror film. It turns out the Jamisons believed their house was haunted. This wasn't a casual, "Oh, I think I heard a bump in the night" kind of thing. This was a deep, paranoid, terrifying belief. Sherilyn was convinced. She had a witch's Bible. She had performed rituals. She told her best friend that spirits, multiple spirits, lived in their home. One of the spirits, they claimed, was a ghost child named Emily. Their 6-year-old daughter, Madison, would talk to Emily regularly. It gets darker. Bobby, too, had come to believe it. He and Sherilyn had gone to their local pastor, desperate for help. They told him they had seen demons. They said they saw spirits, sometimes on the roof of their house. Bobby asked the pastor for special bullets to shoot the spirits. This changes things. And then there's the letter. Back at their home, spray painted in giant letters on the side of a storage container, police find an 11-page, rambling hate letter written by Sherilyn to Bobby. It's not just angry. It's disjointed, paranoid. It talks about him being a hermit. It talks about evil and darkness. This was not a happy, stable family looking for a new home. This was a family in a pressure cooker. So, let's look at the truck again. They drive to this remote mountain. Why? To buy land? Or was it an escape? Were they fleeing the house they believed was infested with demons? And then, what happened? Did they get out of the truck and just walk? Let's look at another piece of evidence. The GPS. The police checked the GPS from the truck, and it shows that on the day they disappeared, they stopped on that mountain road. They got out, they walked around. Then they got back in the truck and drove a little further and stopped again. This time, for good. It's aimless. The case goes cold for 4 years. The world moves on until November 2013. A group of hunters, deer stalking in the same remote area, stumble on human remains. It's them. The skeletal remains of 2 adults and 1 child. They are found less than 3 miles from where the truck was parked. They are lying side by side, face down in the dirt. Finally, an answer, right? Now, the autopsy will tell us what happened. The autopsy report comes back. Cause of death, undetermined. The bodies are too decomposed. There are no bullet holes in the skulls. There are no broken bones, no signs of a struggle, no knife marks. Nothing. The coroner did find a small trace of what might have been methamphetamine in Bobby's system, but it was so degraded, it was inconclusive. So, what happened? Let's try to build a story. Did the family, steeped in paranoia about demons and spirits, drive to the mountains to get away? Did they, in a fit of meth-induced psychosis, or a shared delusion, or just pure terrified panic, decide to flee their truck? Did they run into the woods to escape? What? The demons they thought were following them? Did they walk 3 miles into the dense, unforgiving woods with no coats, no water, no supplies, and just lie down? Together? Side by side? Face down? And wait to die? It's an image that is almost impossible to comprehend. Or was it foul play after all? Did someone, a local, a killer, find them? March them into the woods? But why? And how? With no sign of a struggle? And why leave the dog? Why leave the money? Every answer just creates a dozen more questions. Every piece of evidence contradicts the last. A bag of cash, a haunted house, a strange final photo, a witch's Bible, a request for special bullets, and 3 bodies lying face down in the leaves with no explanation. This story is a void. It's a true-life horror story where the monster is a fog. It's a chilling, baffling, and deeply sad reminder that sometimes the human mind is the most terrifying small town of all. And sometimes people just walk into the dark and never come back. You're looking for a horror story? Forget ghosts. Forget monsters. The most terrifying stories are the ones that don't add up. The ones where the facts are a lie and the truth is buried under incompetence, or worse, a cover-up. This is the story of the Sodder family. And you need to know, from the start, the official report is a lie. The place is Fayetteville, West Virginia. The year is 1945. George Sodder is the American dream personified. An immigrant from Italy, he built a thriving trucking business from nothing. He and his wife Jenny have a beautiful, large home just outside of town. And more importantly, they have 10 beautiful children. They are respected, successful, and by all accounts, happy. But George Sodder has a flaw, at least in some people's eyes. He is loud, he is opinionated, and he hates Benito Mussolini. In a community with a large, and sometimes traditional, Italian-American population, George's outspoken criticism of the fascist dictator did not win him friends. He got into arguments. He received threats. One, in particular, stuck with the family. An insurance salesman, angered by George's politics, had sneered at him. "Your goddamn house is going to go up in smoke," he'd said, "and your children are going to be destroyed. You're going to be punished for your dirty remarks about Mussolini." Another stranger had come by, pointing to the fuse boxes. "This is going to cause a fire someday," he'd warned. George, who'd just had the house rewired and inspected, thought it was strange. But it was 1945. The war was over. Life was returning to normal. It was Christmas. On Christmas Eve, the family celebrated. The older kids, Maurice, 14, Martha, 12, Louis, 10, Jenny, 8, and Betty, 5, begged to stay up late to play with the new toys their oldest sister had bought them. Jenny Sodder agreed, on the condition that they remembered to feed the cows and lock the doors before they went to bed. She and George, along with their 2 oldest boys, John and George Jr., and their youngest daughter Sylvia, went to sleep. At 12:30 a.m., the phone rang. Jenny woke and went downstairs to answer it. On the line was a woman whose voice she didn't recognize. She asked for a name Jenny had never heard. In the background, Jenny could hear laughter and the clinking of glasses, like a party. Jenny said, "You have the wrong number," and hung up. As she walked back to bed, she noticed something odd. The lights were still on. The front door was unlocked. The curtains weren't drawn. The kids must have forgotten. She shut everything down and went back to sleep. At 1:00 a.m., she was woken again, this time by a sound on the roof. A sharp, loud thud, like something heavy had been dropped, and then a rolling sound. She fell back asleep. At 1:30 a.m., she woke for the third time. The house was full of smoke. George Sodder's office was on fire. The house, built of timber, went up like a matchbox. George, Jenny, and 4 of the children. The 2 oldest boys who had been sleeping downstairs, the oldest daughter Marion, who had given the toys, and the youngest, 2-year-old Sylvia, scrambled out of the burning home. They screamed for the 5 children trapped in the attic bedrooms: Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jenny, and Betty. There was no response. The staircase was a wall of fire. This is where the official story, the one that says this was a tragic accident, begins to fall apart. This is where the questions start. And they don't stop. Question 1. The ladder. George Sodder ran to the side of the house to get his heavy-duty ladder. He always kept it propped against the house. He was going to climb to the attic window and save his children, but the ladder was gone. It wasn't just moved, it was missing. Question 2. The trucks. George, in a panic, decided to drive one of his large coal trucks up to the house. He would climb on top of it to reach the window. He jumped in the first truck. It wouldn't start. He tried the second. It, too, was dead. Both trucks had worked perfectly the day before. Question 3. The phone. The fire was raging. The children were screaming, or had gone silent. Marion ran to a neighbor's house to call the Fayetteville Fire Department. The neighbor's phone was dead. The line, it would later be discovered, had been cut. Question 4. The fire department. By the time Marion found another phone, the response was slow, inexplicably slow. The fire chief, F.J. Morris, claimed he couldn't drive the fire truck because he didn't know how to drive it. The town of Fayetteville was only 2.5 miles away. Yet, the fire department did not arrive until 8:30 a.m., 7 hours later. By then, there was nothing to save. The Sodder home was a smoldering pile of ash, collapsed into its own basement. The 5 children were gone. The verdict was swift: death by misadventure. Accidental fire. Case closed. But George and Jenny Sodder, standing over the smoking ruins of their home, knew this was a lie. And the first, most important question, the one that would haunt them for the rest of their lives, was this: where were the bodies? The official story is that the fire was so hot it completely cremated the children, leaving nothing. No bones, no skulls, no skeletons. George and Jenny looked at the chief, F.J. Morris. They asked him, "Is that possible?" He said yes. It is not. A house fire, even an intense one, does not burn hot enough to destroy human bone. A commercial crematorium, which burns at over 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit for several hours, still leaves large bone fragments that must be pulverized into ash. The Sodder fire burned for 45 minutes before the house collapsed. George Sodder knew this. He began to challenge the official report, and as soon as he did, the cover-up began. The fire chief, Morris, claimed to have found a heart in the ashes. He secretly buried it. George and Jenny found out, had it exhumed, and discovered it was a beef liver, completely untouched by the fire. Why would a fire chief plant false evidence? A telephone repairman confirmed the Sodder's phone line hadn't been burned. It had been intentionally cut halfway up the pole. A bus driver who passed through Fayetteville late on Christmas Eve told police he had seen a man at the side of the road throwing balls of fire at the Sodder house. And the ladder? It was found days later tossed into an embankment 75 feet from the house. This was not an accident. This was an arson. This was an abduction. The Sodders never rebuilt their home. Instead, they turned the basement, the grave that held no bodies, into a memorial garden for their missing children. And in 1952, they put up a billboard on Route 16 overlooking the site. It showed the faces of the 5 children, offering a $5,000 reward for information. It would stay there for the rest of their lives. And the leads came in. A woman who ran a tourist stop claimed to have served the children breakfast on Christmas morning, the day after the fire. They were in a car with Florida license plates, accompanied by 2 men and 2 women, all of a dark, Italian extraction. A letter arrived from a woman in St. Louis, claiming that the oldest missing girl, Martha, was living in a convent there. The family hired a private detective, C.C. Tinsley. He discovered the insurance salesman who had threatened George. He also discovered that the fire chief, F.J. Morris, had a relative on the coroner's jury that ruled the fire an accident. The detective told the Sodders he believed they were right. He believed the children had been taken by someone connected to the Italian mafia, someone who knew about George's anti-Mussolini rants. Then, in 1967, 22 years after the fire, a letter arrived. It was postmarked in Central City, Kentucky. There was no return address. Inside was a photograph of a young man in his mid-20s. He had dark, curly hair and the same facial structure as the Sodder boys. On the back of the photo, a cryptic, handwritten message, Louis Sodder. I love Brother Frankie. Illa boys. A9132 or 35. Frankie was the nickname of their son John, one of the boys who had escaped the fire. The Sodders were absolutely convinced this was their son Louis alive. They hired another private detective to go to Kentucky and investigate the lead. The detective took their money and promptly disappeared. The family never heard from him again. The billboard stayed up. George Sodder went to his grave in 1968, still convinced his children were out there. Jenny Sodder, wearing black and mourning every day since the fire, finally died in 1989. The billboard, faded and peeling, was taken down. The last surviving Sodder child, Sylvia, the baby George rescued from the fire, still believes her siblings were stolen, not killed. So, what is the story? Is it a story of a freak fire that defied the laws of physics? Or is it the story of a well-planned, vindictive kidnapping? A crime executed with terrifying precision? A conspiracy to silence a man, protected by a small-town police force, perhaps out of fear, perhaps out of complicity? No one has ever been charged. The 5 Sodder children, if they lived, would be elderly now. But their faces remain frozen in time on that old billboard. A 75-year-old question hanging over a small West Virginia town, a silent, screaming testament to a truth that was nothing but a lie. In the frozen heart of Bavaria, in the deep winter of 1922, there lay a farm. It was not a place of comfort. It was a place of isolation. The locals called it Hinterkaifeck, a name that in itself sounds like a stone dropping into a cold, dark well. It meant, simply, behind the hollow. And behind the hollow it was. A kilometer from the nearest hamlet of Kaifeck, the farmstead was a world unto itself, surrounded by thick, dark woods and fields of endless, silent snow. This was the home of the Gruber family. The farm was ruled by Andreas Gruber, a man known in the villages for being as hard and cold as the winter ground. He was 63, a grim patriarch who, it was whispered, kept his family on a leash of fear. With him lived his wife, Cecilia, aged 72, a woman worn down by the land and her husband. But the dark heart of the household, The subject of the most fevered whispers was their widowed daughter, Victoria Gabriel. Her husband, Carl, had been declared dead in the Grey War, swallowed by the mud of France. Yet, the farm had not been without a child. First came 7-year-old Cecilia, and then 2-year-old Joseph. The village gossiped, their eyes narrow and knowing. They said, Andreas, the father, was also the father of these children. They said the farm was built on a foundation of sin, a dark secret kept hidden by the trees. The farm, it seemed, was beginning to feel the weight of its own darkness. In the late months of 1921, 6 months before the horror, the Gruber's longtime maid suddenly quit. She was a simple, God-fearing woman, and she was terrified. She told the Grubers, and anyone in the village who would listen, that the farm was haunted. Gespenstisch. She heard footsteps in the attic, pacing, always pacing, just above her bed. She heard whispers in the walls, like the house itself was groaning. She heard crying in the night, a thin, desolate sound that didn't come from the children. She fled the farm and refused to look back, telling the Grubers they were living in a cursed place. For 6 months, the Grubers could find no one to replace her. The farm's reputation was too dark, too isolated. Finally, on the 31st of March, 1922, a new maid arrived. Her name was Maria Baumgartner. It was her first day. It would be her last. The farm had been unsettled for weeks. Andreas, not a man easily spooked, had become agitated. He complained to his neighbors on his rare trips to the village. Strange things were happening. First, there was the newspaper. Days before the new maid arrived, Andreas found a newspaper from Munich on his porch. He hadn't bought it. No one in his family had. He asked the postman, who shrugged. It wasn't from him. It was as if a visitor from the city had walked all the way to their remote farm, left the paper, and vanished. Then there were the keys. The main house keys, which Andreas guarded jealously, disappeared. He searched the house, frantic, accusing his family, but they were simply gone. Then, the attic, the same place the previous maid had feared. Andreas heard them now too. Heavy, booted footsteps pacing the hayloft above the family's bedrooms. He climbed the ladder, his lantern cutting a weak yellow circle in the oppressive dark. He held his breath, listening. Nothing. Just the wind and the smell of dry hay. But the dust was disturbed. He searched the farmstead, his suspicion growing into a cold dread. He found nothing. No one. The night before the new maid arrived, there was a snowstorm. It covered the land in a thick, pristine blanket of white. The next morning, Andreas went to the woodshed, and he saw them. Footprints, clear and deep in the fresh snow. They came from the darkest part of the forest, a place no one would walk. They crossed the open field and led directly to the back door of the family home. Andreas followed them, his heart a cold knot in his chest. He circled the house, his eyes scanning the snow. He saw the tracks leading to the house. He saw no tracks leading away. Whoever, or what, had come from the woods was still there. He checked the doors. They were locked. He checked the windows. They were latched. Later that day, he inspected the tool shed. The lock, he found, had been broken, as if someone had tried to pick it with a crude tool. He told a neighbor about the tracks. He spoke of his missing keys. He admitted he had heard the footsteps in the attic. He said he was considering getting a gun. He sounded, for the first time in his life, like a man who was afraid. But he did not call the police. In Hinterkaifeck, you handled your own problems. That night, March 31st, a Friday, the farm fell silent. The new maid, Maria, settled into her small room. Young Cecilia and her baby brother Joseph were put to bed. Andreas, his wife Cecilia, and their daughter Victoria finished their chores. The smoke from their chimney curled into the black, starless sky, and then it stopped. For 4 days, Hinterkaifeck vanished. The mailman, Joseph Mayer, arrived on Saturday, April 1st. He stood on the porch, calling out. The farm was eerily quiet. No dog barked. No cows lowed. He left the mail in the box and walked away, an uneasy feeling crawling up his spine. Sunday came, and the Grubers were not at church. This was noted. The family was not devout, but their absence was unusual. The farm remained silent. Monday passed. Still nothing. By Tuesday, April 4th, the neighbors were concerned. Young Shazilia had not shown up for school on Monday, or again on Tuesday. A small group of men, led by a neighbor named Lorenz Schlittenbauer, decided to investigate. They walked onto the farmstead. The silence was absolute. It was, as Schlittenbauer would later say, deathly. The family dog, a creature Andreas kept chained, was barking weakly inside the barn, but it hadn't made a sound as they approached. They checked the house. It was locked. They moved to the barn. The great wooden door was ajar. Schlittenbauer, carrying a lantern, pushed it open. The smell of hay and manure and something else, something sweet and metallic. The dog whined from a stall. The cattle were restless in their pens. They looked, fed. Schlittenbauer raised his lantern. In the dim, dusty light, he saw them. They were in the hayloft, the Tansbosen, stacked like cordwood. They were partially, almost respectfully, covered with hay. First, he saw Andreas, then his wife, Chazilia, then their daughter, Victoria, and beside her, her 7-year-old daughter, Cecilia. Their bodies were a ruin. Their skulls had been caved in with a pick-like instrument. The blood had soaked deep into the hay and the wooden floorboards. It was a scene of pure, savage butchery. Schlittenbauer and the men stumbled back, gagging. They knew they had to check the house. They used a key, one Schlittenbauer himself had, to enter the home. The kitchen was clean. Too clean. In the maid's quarters, they found the new maid, Maria Baumgartner. She was in her bed, her covers drawn up. She had been killed the same way, a single, devastating blow to the head. And then, the nursery. They found the 2-year-old Joseph. He was in his bassinet, his small body still. The killer had used the same weapon, a farm tool known as a mattock, even on the baby. The police from Munich were called. The investigation was a catalog of chaos. The scene was immediately contaminated. Dozens of villagers traipsed through the house, touching things, moving things, staring at the horror. They ate food from the kitchen. They let the animals out. But as the investigators pieced together the final, awful hours, the true, skin-crawling horror of Hinterkaifeck was revealed. This was not a robbery. A large sum of cash was found, untouched, in the house. This was not a quick, frenzied attack. The autopsies, conducted right there in the barn, showed that the family had not been killed all at once. It appeared the killer had lured them, one by one, from the house to the barn on Friday night. Perhaps the cattle were making noise. Andreas would have gone to check first, then his wife when he didn't return, then Victoria, then young Shazilia following her mother into the dark. They were slaughtered one by one in the hayloft. But the most disturbing discovery, the one that freezes the blood, was this. The killer did not leave. The murders happened on Friday night. But on Tuesday, when the search party arrived, the cattle were fed. The dog had been given water. Food had been eaten in the kitchen. The beds in the main house had been slept in. The killer or killers had murdered 6 people, including a baby, and then stayed on the farm. For 3 days. They lived in the house, with the bodies of the new maid and the child just rooms away. They walked the floors. They stoked the fire, keeping the chimney smoking. They tended the animals in the barn, just feet from the cooling, stacked corpses of the family. Who could do such a thing? Who could live for days in a house of the dead, surrounded by their own brutal work. The investigation was hopeless. The police pursued over 100 suspects. They looked at vagrants, at traveling laborers. They looked at Carl Gabriel, Victoria's dead husband. What if he hadn't died in the war? What if he had come back to find his wife had borne another man's child? They even looked at Lorenz Schlittenbauer, the neighbor who found the bodies. He had been Victoria's lover. He was rumored to be the true father of little Joseph. His behavior at the scene was strange, almost too familiar with the farm. But nothing could be proven. The heads of the victims were removed and sent to Munich for clairvoyant analysis, and were eventually lost in the chaos of the coming war. The murder weapon, the mattock, was never definitively found, though any number of tools on the farm could have done the job. A year later, in 1923, the farmstead of Hinterkaifeck was demolished. The bodies were buried. The sin, the rumors, and the blood all scrubbed from the land. They leveled the house, the barn, the shed. They plowed the earth, salted it, and left it barren. Today, it is just an empty field. A small, simple shrine stands where the house once was. But the land remembers. The trees remember. The killer was never found. He walked out of the forest, lived inside the walls, committed an act of unspeakable violence, and then, for 3 long days, made a home among the dead. And then, like a ghost, he simply walked away, disappearing back into the hollow, leaving nothing but 6 bodies and a story that will curdle the blood for 100 years to come.